How's it going, everyone? I am in my WoW-brained mood, and I would like to talk about my controversial opinions. Except they're not that controversial, they're just my experiences that don't necessarily match up with the generally accepted hive-mind opinions all of the time, but sometimes they do. I basically just want to go through every World of Warcraft expansion and talk about my experiences with it. I am going to be including Classic in with that because, as you'll soon find out, I didn't necessarily start with WoW from the beginning, but even with the expansions I haven't played, I will talk about at least my perception of them from the outside, or how I feel about them having played through some of the content later on, etc. So, without further ado, let's begin with World of Warcraft, the 2004 experience, the vanilla game. I did not play it, but I did know of it. See, my first MMO was RuneScape back in 2007. My friend introduced me to RuneScape, and I didn't understand how to get through Tutorial Island and had to get him to log into my account. Please do not report me for account sharing. And, you know, I had my eye on World of Warcraft, but it was, you know, I was a kid. I was, okay, 2004 I would have been 9, but around the time I actually got to play it, spoilers, Burning Crusade, I was around, you know, 11, 12, 13. How do the years add up? But no, from the outside looking in, World of Warcraft looked fascinating. I think I saw the South Park episode of WoW, and that kind of informed what I thought WoW would be. I was fascinated by this online game where you could just show up to town and people could just murder you, because that's how it seemed like things would be in the South Park version of the game. You had that guy going around just killing people. But yeah, for the most part, that was how I viewed World of Warcraft, this crazy digital Second Life world. It was very much the outside perspective of someone who'd go on to spend thousands of hours in this game later on in life. But of course, World of Warcraft Classic launched back in, what was it, 2019 I want to say, and I got to experience vanilla then, except by then my brain had been poisoned by later versions of the game, and so it was a lot of adjusting to like, oh hey, can't do this now, or like, this rotation is completely different. I wouldn't even call it a rotation necessarily, just buttons you can press every now and again when they're relevant. But no, I absolutely adored my time in WoW Classic when it first launched. It was really fun to be able to go back and explore the game back in its original state, or an approximation thereof anyway. Now, one of the things I did have difficulty with in WoW Classic Vanilla, I guess if that's what we're calling it nowadays, is that leveling through the game was a much more social experience. Not in terms of like, oh hey, this is nice, it's social, but more in terms of like, oh, it's required. Like, it was a lot more difficult to solo questing, basically. And I did make some nice connections within the game for a while, but then things got a little bit weird, and then I felt myself hesitating to log into the game because it would also be a social experience instead of just a relaxing one. And yeah, you know, it was definitely a time. But no, the first time I ever played World of Warcraft was during the Burning Crusade. Quite late during the Burning Crusade. I think it was during the Fury of the Sunwell patch, which I believe was the final patch. But my dad got me the battle chest, which included the original World of Warcraft game and the World of Warcraft Burning Crusade game, as well as game guides for the original game and the expansion pack. And while I have lost my original battle chest to time, I did actually manage to pick up a replacement for about a tenner. I don't know how crazy of a deal that was. Obviously, like, it's not like, oh wow, an old game you can just pop in and play. I'm sure those discs don't work anymore. But I wanted the battle chest and the guides as a kind of like, this is the version of WoW I started with and I own it kind of a thing. I don't own any collector's editions apart from that weird 15th anniversary one they did long ago. But I do own that, and that makes me happy. The first ever character I rolled was a human warrior, just to kind of see what was going on. It was probably called Kritigri, funnily enough, which is not the nickname or the internet pseudonym, I guess, that I really used properly until I was around 20, but I did invent it much earlier, and I took it out for a test drive here, damn it. Proto Kritigri, we will call him. He didn't last long. I think I got to Goldshy, jumped around a bit, went, wow, this is crazy. Then I saw someone turn into a cat, and went, I want to do that. And so my first character was born, Shadow Mad Man, the Night Elf Druid. I was 12. Anyway, I didn't get far. I got up to around level 20. I managed to turn into a cat, but I found the grind to be insane. And there's a reason why I found a grind to be insane. It's because I didn't really do quests. I just kind of killed random enemies that were wandering around and talked to my guild, which was called Dynasty Warriors, by the way. If anyone from Dynasty Warriors on the EU realm Karazhan remembers Shadow Madman, hi, it's me. How's it going? I also made a guild at one point called Shadows of the Damned, I think, or Shadows of Destiny. I think it was Shadows of Destiny. It was a very Darren Shan novel name kind of a guild. I was a very edgy kid, okay, and I also found it very funny that the abbreviation for that guild was SOD. I don't think anyone's still playing in Shadows of Destiny or Shadows of the Damned, or whatever I called that guild. But hey, for all I know, someone else took over guild leadership, and the people who played back then continued to play and became a mythic raiding team that's renowned the world over. Maybe I planted the seeds of the Echo Guild and never knew it. Anyway, I did make a few alt characters. I remember I was particularly interested in the Blood Elf starting experience. I really enjoyed the Draenei starting experience. Sorry, I know they're Draenei, I've always called them Draenei. But yeah, as I said, I came from RuneScape, so I remember looking at trees and going, how do I level woodcutting? Because of course woodcutting would be a thing that you could level, right? It was an MMO. That's just a thing in every MMO. We're not about to start talking about Burning Crusade Classic just yet, because while my subscription eventually lapsed, my Burning Crusade adventures do not stop there. But how, you may ask? Christian, this was before you could play up to level 20 for free. Just how were you playing World of Warcraft without paying a subscription? Well, private servers. I will never regret my time playing on World of Warcraft private servers of old, because it meant I got to get my free level 70 character boost, because you used to have those realms which was just like everyone starts at level 70, it's just purely focused on endgame. But of course I didn't understand what endgame was. I just wanted to have a level 70 druid so I could fly and be a bird and fly around and explore Nagrand, and that's mostly what I spent my time doing. But yeah, while I wouldn't touch private servers with a 10-foot pole these days, back when I was a broke-ass kid who didn't know any better, I had a great time exploring these private servers. I had a friend from America called Dylan. Dylan, if you follow the channel, hi, how's it going? I doubt you do, but I hope you're well. Went by the username Zelkrim back in the day. We explored a bunch of private servers together, and this extended into early Wrath as well, but I think I kind of stopped around then. My favourite part of our private server adventures would be when, you know, private servers would allow you to teleport to Mount Hyjal, which at the time was an undeveloped area of a map, or the Emerald Dream, which was an undeveloped area of a map, and you would get to explore these areas which the developers had not finished. And so there would be some grass textures and some trees, but there would be no enemies or anything, and then it would just transition into this solid green texture. I'm sure if you've seen people exploring the War Within alpha or anything like that, you might have seen them break out of bounds in testing and see that's still very much the way that these areas are built, and it was really fascinating to explore as a kid. I loved it so much. I have a passing interest in game development, and honestly, it might have started there. There was also a... so you know how recently these games have become popular, like Chained Together, where you have a series of obstacles. It's basically just like an asset flip Unreal Engine game where they've just got obstacles and piled them into the sky, and you have to jump up them, and then you fall. If you fail, you fall down them, and it's like this impossibly hard game because you have to start from the beginning most of the time if you fail. World of Warcraft private servers were doing this over a decade ago, and I actually won a competition where hundreds of people were jumping across chairs and tables and stuff floating in the sky to get to the top. And I thought, this will be fun, and I just had a go, and I won, and they gave me a super rare mount, which I couldn't use yet because I was a low-level player, and I also never stuck around long enough to level up to be able to use that mount, so I just kind of robbed that from someone else who might have enjoyed it more. I don't even remember what the mount was, but this was before the shop existed, so it was probably just a rare boss drop mount. It wasn't Ashes of Alara, I can tell you that much. Anyway, sorry, the Burning Crusade Classic eventually came out, and so I was able to go back and revisit the version of the game I remembered from my childhood, and questing was a little bit easier and a little bit faster, and some of the class rotations made a bit more sense, and the game in general was just a little bit more familiar to me personally. And while I've never stuck around in Classic for an extended period of time, I've never leveled a character to max, I did really enjoy checking it out again once more. But yeah, as mentioned, I didn't really stick around after Burning Crusade, so Wrath of the Lich King, I remember watching the CGI cinematic for. It's obviously one of the best CGI cinematics they've ever done for an expansion announcement. It's iconic, but mostly I just remember like, oh, last time we went to space, now we're just going to some frozen island continent in the north. I was less interested because it felt more domestic, and this is going to be a running theme we run into as I talk about expansions going forwards. This video is a bit longer than I expected it to be. Oh god, we've still got so many to talk about. I'll try and speed up. I did play some Wrath of the Lich King Classic, but I didn't play a huge amount of it. I did make a Death Knight. I enjoyed the Death Knight opening experience. I was able to see what Death Knights played like when they first came out, but I never leveled him to max. I distinctly remember World of Warcraft Cataclysm being announced, because I was playing a private server at that point, and I was fishing at Loch Modan with a friend. And I saw how they were basically draining Loch Modan, and Loch Modan was one of my favourite zones, and I was gutted. I was like, I can't believe they're ruining this zone. I love being here. I'm still not sure I've forgiven them, to be honest. But I remember turning to my friend and saying, do you think that they're done with World of Warcraft after this? I was like, World of Warcraft is an old game now. I said, do you think they're just destroying the world because they're done with it? It's hilarious in hindsight, because clearly what they were doing was the opposite. They were modernizing the old world zones to make them friendlier for new players going forward. They were actually investing in the game's future, and I was here like, oh man, it looks like they're just destroying the game because they're done with it, man. What I have a little bit more experience with is what we currently have in WoW Classic, which is Cataclysm Classic. And the reason I was interested in Cataclysm Classic is because when I first started truly playing World of Warcraft, it was Mists of Pandaria. And so, in my mind, I was excited for Cataclysm Classic because Cataclysm was the new base version of the game, if you know what I mean. And then Mists of Pandaria was the expansion to it. So when they came out of Cataclassic, it was almost like, oh, this is my version of WoW. Even though I started an expansion later, this is my version of WoW to go and re-experience. And just like I've said with every iteration of Classic, I didn't stick around to endgame or anything like that, but I sunk a decent amount of time into it. And again, yeah, I did really enjoy going back to that version of WoW and being like, oh, I forgot that this thing used to be this way. If you want to see more of my experiences exploring Cataclysm Classic on its release, there's a video on my channel in the Classic Azeroth Adventures playlist. Crescendra the Accursed, she is the character I made. She's a Worgen Warlock, and I should get back to playing her at some point, honestly, before Classic just keeps turning and then I lose another era to play. But yes, as I just gave away, I commonly tell people that I started playing World of Warcraft in Mists of Pandaria because, while of course, as I've mentioned, I did play it during Burning Crusade and a little bit of Wrath, mostly on private servers, I was a dumb kid and I didn't hit endgame or anything like that. But Mists of Pandaria, that is when I truly started playing the game. I would have been probably around 18 or 19. I was just starting uni, I just got my own disposable income, and I went, you know what's a really good idea right now is to invest some of my time into World of Warcraft. Hey, I graduated, I got my upper second class honours, I did just fine. Using my degree on the other hand. Anyway, let's get back to the video. I remember questing through Cataclysm and being like, oh hey, I'm finally getting to see Cataclysm, because it felt like a lifetime ago since they had announced it from my perspective, because I was young and the years were longer back in those days. Oh my gosh. And I remember asking my guild, hey, Mists of Pandaria, is it actually worth picking up? Is it worth buying the expansion? And everyone was like, yes, of course, it's a really good expansion, and it's kind of weird to play World of Warcraft without owning the latest expansion. And I remember being very surprised by this because when Mists of Pandaria got announced, everyone ridiculed it because it was pandas. We'd gone from a dragon destroying the world to Kung Fu Panda. And yes, I know Pandaren predate Kung Fu Panda. You don't have to tell me. Trust me, I know. But back then, I was like, okay, I guess we like the pandas now. Mists of Pandaria, my time playing throughout, leveling from 1 to 90. Those are some of my fondest memories of the game because I was part of a guild I really liked. I was playing it with my friend Reese. While me and Reese, you may know him from the channel, he shows up a lot, Kiri. We have a channel together called Dimension Jam, you should go check it out. While we knew each other back in school, our friendship didn't really properly, start until this era in our lives, I would say. Maybe a little bit earlier. And so I was like, oh, you're playing WoW? I'm playing WoW. Want to play WoW together? And so we did, and it was a great time. People often talk about how 5.4, the Siege of Orgrimmar patch, lasted for eternity. To give you just an indication of just how long that was, I started my leveling journey for the very first time, meaning it would have been a very slow experience, and finished it, and also did some raiding, all within 5.4, meaning I never got to see the Veil of Eternal Blossoms how it was meant to be seen until they fixed it up years later. I didn't reclaim Shadow Madman, I lost that account sadly, but I did make a new account on Chamber of Aspects. I made a balanced druid named Kritigri, because I misspelled my own name and didn't notice for years. Customer support were very accommodating and allowed me to fix that typo for free. By the way, back in the day, WoW's customer support used to be great. I hear they're not anymore, which is a shame. We can probably blame Kotick for that one. Anyway, I remember pre-ordering Warlords of Draenor and using my boost on my Night Elf Mage. I was a big Night Elf enjoyer. My third character was a Night Elf Hunter, so stand by, because we're also going to get a Night Elf Death Knight and of course a Night Elf Demon Hunter and many, many, many more. In fact, if you would like to see a spreadsheet detailing all of the characters I have, and their levels and their classes and specs and all that fun kind of data, there is a link in the description below to a spreadsheet which I keep updated. It will of course contain spoilers for what's to come in this video though. Now, I promised some controversial opinions at the start of this, didn't I? So I should probably get on with those. I had a really good time in Warlords of Draenor, but I can explain why. Warlords of Draenor was my first new expansion experience, which meant everything hit that much harder. I experienced my first kind of almost Christmas Eve joy of waiting for the new expansion to release. Usually they release at about 11 PM for us here in the UK. I actually have a really, really old video on this channel, I believe it's public still, called Warlords of Draenor Launch Night, where you can hear I think I have a cold in that video, unfortunately, but you can hear a younger version of me talking to a younger version of Reese, and our experiences on Warlords of Draenor Launch Night, which was, quite famously, not the smoothest launch experience we've ever had. I've got a lovely bunch of griffin mounts. Here they are, all standing in a row. But it was my first WoW launch experience, and so I was like, well, of course it's going to be like this. I'm just going to be patient and not complain too much. I assumed they were all like this. Anyway, there are, to be fair, people who will tell you that Warlords of Draenor has one of the best leveling experiences in terms of story and zone themes and soundtrack, and I wholeheartedly agree with that. I adored leveling through Warlords of Draenor, partially because I was still quite new to World of Warcraft's lore, and I was fascinated by it, and I was diving into it and learning about it. And this was an expansion that took us back in time to an alternate timeline, and was like, hey, all these characters you've read about, here they are. Here's Gul'dan doing some shenanigans. Here's Grommash yelling that they will never be slaves. Actually, he didn't get around to doing that in the original timeline, but let's not worry too much. And then, of course, the Warlords of Draenor expansion plot built up to Legion, but we'll get to that in a minute. So, if you don't know, the reason why Warlords of Draenor is pretty much universally despised is because it had a massive drought of content shortly after the massive drought of content that we had at the end of Mists of Pandaria. It's not confirmed, but pretty widely accepted fact that an entire patch and raid tier was pretty much skipped in this expansion. We had the patch where the main feature was the selfie camera, which I was happy with because I used Twitter a lot, and I was like, this is really cool. I'm gonna make my own World of Warcraft specific Twitter account. I was so young. But the main reason I was still having a good time, I hasten to add, is I didn't have my army of alts yet. This is the expansion where I went around making all of my alts. I discovered warrior, I discovered shaman, I discovered other classes. While everyone else was sitting around going, I have nothing to do. This is the worst expansion ever. I was going, whoa, it feels good when I hit things with axes. I didn't know that. While people were going, I'm literally sat in my garrison and I can't see any other players and I don't ever have to leave my garrison. This sucks. I was going, whoa, I've got my own personal instance. I love this. So it was part being new to the game and it was part youthful naivete, I guess. But for that reason, I'm one of the very few people who actually has a soft spot for Warlords of Draenor. I will always love that expansion, despite its many flaws. Many. But in comes Legion, the second golden age of WoW, as I feel like it's probably pretty widely understood to be nowadays. Up until this point, Wrath of the Lich King was, heralded as the peak of World of Warcraft, and it was just kind of accepted that it would never be that good again. World of Warcraft was becoming a niche game that some nerds played that was aging and probably coming towards its end, if we were being honest. And then Legion happened, and oh my god, did that revitalize the game. I was soundly rewarded for building my army of alts, because suddenly every class had a unique storyline to go and do. Plus, Demon Hunters were a thing, and while I saw some criticism about Demon Hunters being a 2-button class rotation and not being that fun to play, I loved them. I still quite enjoy them. I made my Demon Hunter Virazard. I was like, I can have a purple-themed Demon Hunter. This is so cool. He has purple tattoos. And nowadays, he's usually shirtless and shoulder padless because he just looks cooler that way. And he's got like a long, they have their own hair colors. So he has this like super dark blue braid going down his back. It's great. I love him. As someone who first dipped their toe into the game during the Burning Crusade, Legion was kind of like, oh, we're going back to that kind of like, we've got Illidan back, we're dealing with the Legion again. It kind of felt like a sequel to that expansion. And yeah, it was super cool. I was super invested. The one thing I will say about Legion, in terms of my experience, where it wasn't quite as good as it is around the time that the guild I was in started to kind of fracture and dissipate, and a lot of the game lost its luster for me in that regard. But no, I played plenty of Legion, and yeah, I don't feel like there's too much else to say about Legion. It's widely beloved and I love it. Big shock. Now, I think every World of Warcraft player has their first expansion where it doesn't hit and they go, oh no. For me, that was Battle for Azeroth. This is also not a super controversial opinion because Battle for Azeroth is also pretty widely regarded as a low point within the game's history. But for me, it wasn't just Azerite and Azerite armor and all the borrowed power problems and all the issues that plagued BFA with like the story and all that. It wasn't just that drove me away from it. It was the setting. As I mentioned previously, I find the kind of more grounded domestic settings within World of Warcraft expansions to be a little disappointing because sometimes we go to space, and it's always cool when we go to space, and this wasn't us going to space. Of course, if we always went to space, it wouldn't be cool when we went to space, I know. But consider, the first time I played WoW, Burning Crusade, we went to space. Even though I didn't get to go to space until I was, like, doing the private server shenanigans, it was still like where we ended up going, if you know what I mean. And then I didn't really play during Wrath or Kata, and then when I played during Mists of Pandaria, it was just kind of fine because it was the game. I was just experiencing the game. I wasn't hoping we would go somewhere super interesting. I was learning the game world. And to be fair, Pandaria is very different to a lot of the other, Azerothian continents. It's not alien, but it's culturally different, like, fundamentally, and that was super interesting to explore. And then in Warlords of Draenor, we went to space, but we also went back in time to space. And then in Legion, while the initial zones were a lot more grounded in terms of like, oh, it's the Broken Isles, there was a lot of lore surrounding them, and we were being invaded by demons from space, and we did eventually go to space. When I say we should go to space, to make it interesting, by the way, I am oversimplifying. It doesn't have to be space. One of my favourite zones in the game is Najata, for instance. And so when the initial BFA zones were just, we're going to Kultiris, I was like, oh, okay, we're going to human zones. Cool. That's fun. It was also a lot more like the undercurrent of BFA was Old Gods, whereas, you know, before the undercurrent of a lot of stuff that I'd played before was the Legion, and I was a lot less interested in Old God stuff than I was in Legion stuff. And it was the first time I ever experienced leveling through a new expansion and just being like, eh. And that kind of shook me. I was like, oh no, but this is my game that I love. Playing through a new expansion should feel like Christmas, and playing through the Alliance Battle for Azeroth zones did not feel like Christmas. If anything, it felt like work. Now, I will add, I did eventually make my Horde character and level through the Zandalari zones, and I found those to be a lot more fun. But in general, another thing I really disliked about Battle for Azeroth was that we had done the Mists of Pandaria experience of, you know, exploring this war between the Alliance and the Horde, and kind of getting away from that and growing as characters, and looking beyond our hatred, etc. And then we had Warlords of Draenor, and then we had Legion, which was like, you know, banding together with the Horde to fight back against the Legion, even though there was an overly contrived misunderstanding plot to make some hostilities arise for one particular zone. And then with BFA, I was just like, wait, we're having a war? After Sargeras stabbed the planet, we're focusing on having a war. Why? It felt like a monumental step backwards in terms of the storytelling of this world, and I was so set against it, and I don't think I'm alone in that. And so the fact that this faction warfare was such a heavy theme of Battle for Azeroth, it was just ick. That's all I can really boil it down to. It was just ick. This also began a style of questing, in my opinion, throughout the start of the expansion, where it felt like they would give you this grand narrative of, this is what the expansion is about, and then they'd be like, okay, now go spend 20 hours or whatever it is leveling through 10 levels of mostly irrelevant material. You're just going to be visiting the different peoples of you know, this new continent that you're exploring, and you're going to help them with their, like, Quillbore situation and that kind of thing. And while there's always been some of that, I felt like starting with BFA, that really became the main focus of questing. It's almost like any of the actual important story they wanted to tell you only happened during endgame patch content. And it was like, well, what are we even doing here? What is the point of leveling up then? But maybe I'm being too harsh, and maybe that's just a symptom of me not vibing with the world content in that expansion. But as I've already said, I really enjoyed Najata, so Battle for Azeroth wasn't a complete loss for me. And while the story had to take a pretty severe hard left to get there, I also really enjoyed the patch content for the final patch of Battle for Azeroth, where we were dealing with the Old Gods and going back to old zones and doing horrific visions and stuff like that. That was all pretty cool stuff. I do still wish we got a full zone in the style of the Black Empire as we saw it during the Nyalofa raid, but that could still happen. Now, I remember around the time of Battle for Azeroth, a lot of people were saying, so this one was a miss, the next one needs to be a hit, or World of Warcraft is doomed and it will never recover. Well, fam, I got some bad news for you. The next one was Shadowlands, which has usurped Warlords of Draenor's place, I feel, as the expansion that is almost universally scorned in retrospect as well as when it was happening. But you know what I'm going to say, don't you? If you've been paying attention to my opinions in this video, you know what I'm about to say. The leveling experience? Kinda cool. The opening statement for Shadowlands was really cool. I loved the CGI cinematic of Sylvanas going up to fight Bolvar and doing the opposite of what people expected her to do. I was honestly going to be quite disappointed if they put that Lich King crown on her head, because I was like, you're not really going to go for the most obvious bare bones plotline of like, oh, Sylvanas evil now, lol. Sylvanas become the thing that she hated, lol. Mind you, what they went with wasn't much better until we got the Sylvanas novel. But the whole idea of shattering the sky to rip the veil between life and death to go and visit the lands of the afterlife was such a cool concept, and I think that's what I'm landing on. I really liked Shadowlands conceptually. Like, the Afterlives short with Bastion and having Uther kind of like regard Arthas and throwing him into the moor and breaking the rules, that shit was so good. Where the fuck was that in the questing experience? Because while I'm saying I really liked exploring the zones of Bastion, Ardenweald, Maldraxxus and Revendreth, I really liked all of them conceptually. They were all super heavily thematically unique. Again, a lot of the questing was, this is what these people do, go talk to them and find out their ills and their problems and that kind of thing. I will say this also marks the beginning of me noticing the next thing, which really puts me off of questing through New World of Warcraft expansions these days, and that I really hope they have fixed with the War Within, but I have not seen it addressed anywhere. And for the record, I had much worse issues with this in Dragonflight than I did in Shadowlands, but that is difficulty scaling and damage scaling, because you enter a new expansion on your main character that's pretty well geared, and you are melting through enemies and you feel like a god, and by the time you get to like 4 levels before max level, you are wading through shit and it just does not feel fun. But anyway, a lot of reasons why Shadowlands was pretty universally despised is also reasons why I did not love Shadowlands. A lot of the stubbornness behind development philosophy did not rub off well with me. Regarding like Torghast progression and wouldn't it be cool if we made you walk through the moor and that kind of thing. It's also worth noting that this is the expansion where the pandemic hit, and so progress on development slowed down dramatically, kind of unavoidably. And, uncomfortable topic but not one we should bury, it's also around the time when all of the harassment lawsuit stuff came out around Blizzard and really kind of like trampled our faith in the people who we thought we liked making the game. Things seem to be better nowadays, we can only hope, I guess. I follow a lot of Blizzard people and they seem to be happy, so I'm kind of okay with supporting the Blizzard of now. But boy do I wish I could have gone back in time and been like, hey, let's not touch this game with a 10-foot pole while these people are doing it. But yeah, obviously, when that shitstorm came out, that also soured my taste on the game, as it did many people's, rightfully so. But to continue talking about the expansion itself, it ended with Zereth Mortis, which was kind of the beginning of them turning around and being like, alright, we'll do it your way. Burger King! We ended the Burger King era of World of Warcraft. And, you know, Zereth Mortis was kind of cool. I still had a lot of issues with the open world design of Zereth Mortis. Their insistence, and this hasn't changed so far, but their insistence on, like, we're gonna make these really convoluted puzzles of you need to go and collect these 17 different items from these different mobs in various areas that you need an add-on to find half of them so that you can go and open this chest to get this reagent to work towards putting together this one customization for this option for this mount we've given you, is so not up my alley. It doesn't, like, it's weird kind of piecemeal design, but at the same time there's a lot of stuff about Zereth Mortis that I did enjoy as well. My main issue with Shadowlands, if we're being brutally honest, is my PC was starting to have difficulties running the game, and it was really difficult to enjoy a game that kept suffering from massive frame drops and freezes. I'm pleased to announce that, hey, I don't really have those issues anymore because I got a better PC. But yeah, it's been a while since I've even thought about Shadowlands, but maybe now would be a good time to start going back and farming some transmogs and stuff. I wouldn't mind leveling a character through that time walking campaign back when all the better methods of getting levels fast are finally removed from the game with the pre-patch and Mists of Pandaria time running, etc. I think I'm finally ready to step back into the mess of Shadowlands and being like, okay, let's appreciate you for the good things, because there are some good things in my opinion. And that brings us to Dragonflight, the latest expansion, which is, I think, gonna kind of be perceived from here on out as this weird kind of in-between era of how the game used to be and how it's going to be going forwards with the War Within. Dragonflight's weird, because in a lot of ways, it doesn't really feel like World of Warcraft, in a way I can't quite put my finger on. But, like, I don't know. I feel like seeing the War Within and what's coming with that and the storylines they're touching on with that and all that, it kind of makes me feel like, oh yeah, this is WoW. And when I'm looking at Dragonflight, I'm like, why were you not WoW? Because Dragonflight was good, but it's also the expansion I've played the least of out of all of the ones I've mentioned since Mists of Pandaria. And that's not me saying I've barely played it. I've spent a decent chunk of time in Dragonflight, but I have not been overly invested in the main Dragonflight story. It's kind of been something I've followed loosely, and the main memory I'm going to take away from Dragonflight, I think, is when I played for it on launch, just how fast I fell off it. Blizzard like to talk a lot about their new design philosophy, but I still found a lot of issues with stubbornness from their old design philosophy, such as locking important story beats behind reputation grinding, which I've not seen any sign of them doing with A War Within, which I feel very thankful for, but if I'm wrong on that, I'm going to be so annoyed, because I got to max level, and after slogging my way through bad scaling and getting to max level and seeing all these storylines which weren't necessarily super relevant to the main plot, I was like, okay, cool, let's get on with the main plotline then. And the game was kind of like, I'm gonna need you to just grind world quests to get to the right renown level to continue playing through the storyline. And I went, oh, I don't want to play this game anymore. Legit, I cancelled my sub within the same month that the expansion came out, and I went and I played something else. I came back to explore Zaralet Caverns, and I thought that was kind of cool, but again, not super gripping. And I think, as is typically the case with modern WoW expansions, I spent the most amount of time in the final patch. I enjoyed the Emerald Dream patch. I was like, oh shit, wait, we're going back to the Emerald Dream? I main a druid? Okay, cool. Let's spend some time in an outdoor zone version of the Emerald Dream. I quite enjoyed like the Emerald Bounty stuff, and also playing through a lot of this earlier patch content at the end as well. I realized I have kind of been overlooking how cool like the time rifts and stuff are. You know, just these community events. I completely avoided like the community feast events in like 10.0. I didn't realize how fun and rewarding those are, so that was definitely one of the reasons I didn't enjoy, I think, the opening to this expansion so much, is because I didn't quite engage with some of the new things they were doing. But honestly, the most fun I've been having with Dragonflight has been the very end of the expansion with some of the crazy things they've been doing, like, you know, the whole Mists of Pandaria time running thing. I have leveled up more alts to max than I've ever had before, and it is because of the event and the War Within's pre-patch, which we can't really lump in with Dragonflight. But yeah, I think that about sums up my thoughts and experiences. I'm not going to be one of those people who likes to definitively say, I'm done with WoW, and then comes back a year later, oh, okay, fine, they've sucked me back in, and then a year later, I'm done with WoW. Like, there are so many people who do that, it drives me a little bit crazy. I'm just happy to openly acknowledge that my interest in WoW waxes and wanes, and at the minute, we're certainly in a waxing period of my interest, and I don't see it waning for a while unless the War Within repeats some of these mistakes, like you know, the difficulty scaling, or it's not really difficulty, but like damage output and stuff, and like irrelevant feeling quests along the main quest line and that kind of thing. I've been hearing some stuff about them mixing up how they approach the main quest line, so we'll see how that goes. But yeah, I hope it's better, and I hope it's cool, and I hope to one day be as invested in this game as I was back during Mists of Pandaria and Warlords of Draenor, as weird as that sounds to people who didn't listen to the earlier part of this video. Normally, I do a video kind of like around this time being like, oh, here's what I thought about the last expansion, or here's what I'm hoping for in the next expansion, but I think that's what this video is basically going to do. And that's the function this video serves. So thank you for listening. I know it's been a decent chunk of time. Hopefully my opinions have been interesting, have been unique, at least in some areas, and I really hope War Within is good, and I hope you enjoy it too. So thanks for listening, and I'll catch you in whatever I make next.